Welcome to Art Lounge.
So, what's Art Lounge? It's space for artists, ones aspiring, or those who enjoy it, to come together and share ideas, thoughts, expression, and creation. So whether you're an illustrator, a writer, a musician, sculptor, comedian, dancer, architect, or someone who enjoys art in general, this space is for you. I'll be streaming daily with a mix of content, and in the near future, I'll be announcing different opportunities for you to participate in. So stick around. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Drawing Comics stream. I will be continuing to draw John Buscema's Conan the Barbarian. Just to take a look quickly at the panel I'm going to be drawing and just his work, how great it is. I'm going to be starting off with this one right here, and just looking at it, it's beautiful work. Simple lines, not so many of them, but every single line kind of creates the shape of the face, which is really cool. I really enjoy, and there's so much expression to it. Like, you could see that he's a little bit peeved, but at the same time ready for whatever is coming his way. And just being able to do that within the eyebrows, how they're shaped, and every single line really does bring out this face expression, like this line right here. If you were to exclude that line right there, I don't think it would portray as such a strong emotion on his face. And these lines right here, adding up to more of an exaggerated face expression as well. And I really do enjoy, as I mentioned before, like, he does have this like realism that's attached to his work, but at the same time it does still maintain this comic book kind of feel to it. So let's just jump into it. And well, I guess this one doesn't really have as much of a frame, but it does have part of the frame involved. So let's just start with the ruler and give ourselves space to work within, make sure that it all fits. I was mentioning in other streams, the best thing to do is kind of give yourself a general shape to work with it. Before you jump into details, just give yourself like a light sketch of what's on there. And these could be just blocked shapes, like just blocks of shapes, like for the face, for the hair. It doesn't have to go into too much detail, but pay attention to, like, if you're drawing from the comic, if you're doing references, pay attention to the space in between. So the space between, let's say, the face and the hair, try to bring it as close to each other as it is in the reference, or make sure that it's not too far away. So these are things that you want to pay attention to. And also, like I was mentioning, the negative space, right? So for instance, instead of drawing the shape of the face, you could just focus on something a little bit smaller. Like, let's say this shape right here, which is the hair and the face. So it's kind of looks like an arm, so you want to make sure you focus on that part. And it's easier to just sometimes condense what you're looking at into something more of like a simple form, so that you could focus on that. When you're looking at an image and you don't really give yourself this limit, it becomes a little bit intimidating and you're just overwhelmed by all the things that you have to capture. So if you do this, if you try to use this tool, this method of using negative space as a way of ensuring proportion, ensuring accuracy, you kind of make the process a little bit easier for yourself, and you also train your ability to see certain details that otherwise would be too overwhelming. You're too focused on capturing the entire image. But if you zoom in on a specific part and just focus on that part, it becomes a little bit easier for you to reference when you're looking back and forth between the reference and your drawing. Instead of looking at the entire image, you're just focused on this shape. And it just makes it more fun that way. You kind of use your imagination. You're like, okay, what does it really look like? What does this negative space resemble? So the fact that I kind of see like an arm, the wrist area of an arm, makes it a little bit easier to reference. So let's go back to it. We gave ourselves this framework. And again, you could use this negative space idea for the other part. So this is the limit within the frame, same as it is here. So within this frame, this part of the hair is a little bit closer. And again, this is like the negative space right here, right? This shape is your negative space. So you can use that as a reference, and you could say, okay, well, from here to here, it's not really supposed to be too far away from the frame. So this hairline is supposed to be pretty close to the edge of the frame. So you're not always going to draw like this, but again, these are just tools and methods you can use to eventually get better at eyeing things, and not having to. I don't really use it as much, or just it's second nature, really. Like we were saying before, it's like tying your shoe, or if you want to use another reference, I would say reading, right? You don't have to be A, B, C, D, E. Okay, that's how you say E. No, you already know. You've practiced it. You've read so many times. You don't have to say the alphabet every single time to remember what the letter sounds like or where it is or whatever. It just happens. So it's the same thing. You have these tools, now you're thinking, okay, this negative space, I have to pay attention to the shape, but eventually it becomes that you just see it automatically. You're like, okay, I see the shape, and it just so happens that you draw it the way you see it. But for now, again, this is like learning your ABCs. You're learning these little techniques, these tools to improve your hand-eye coordination and attention to detail, and also having your hand sync with your eye and be able to translate what you see onto the paper. But until then, you kind of have to stick to your ABCs. You have to make sure that you keep these methods in mind when you think about them. And best way to do that is to just write, So if you're drawing on this page and you recognize this, you could be like, okay, keep in mind to recognize negative space. And then you could reference that the next day when you sit down. Next day you sit down to draw, you could open up the book and you could review what you've learned, what you wrote down. You could be like, oh, okay, it was these things. So, all right. So going back to it, more guidelines. You want to make sure that you include, since we're doing the face, we're going to do the crosshair in the middle to make sure that both sides of the face are getting proportion correctly. And you could just quickly sketch it out. So this is where your nose would be, right? Maybe we're going to give it a little bit more of a curve because it's not straight on and it's not exactly right in the middle. His head is a little bit tilted. Let's see. So, you want to give it a little bit more of a curve. the crosshair. So you got the eye here, you got the nose. Now pay attention to this part, and this is something really important as well. When you're drawing the face, and this is such a common mistake with people, and you'll notice it, like once you see it, you can't unsee it, is how often people draw the nose, or the end of the nose, let's just say, is so much further away from the eye, so it looks kind of weird. And sometimes they do the opposite, where it's a little bit too close to the nose. And really, I'd say it's like about like an eye and a half space difference if you were to like flip the eye vertically. And you could also use like a measuring tool to make sure that you get it right. So let's say you can measure the eye. Let's see, here to here. And then from the eye to right about where the nose is. Some people use a pencil. I just like to use a ruler because I'm going to be using it often, so the better I get at using it, the easier it's going to be for me in the future. So like, this is it. It's about like an eye and a half. But you don't only have to use the ruler. Whoops. You don't only have to use the ruler, you could use the pencil, you could also try to eye it the best you can, but that is something to look out for. You really do want to pay attention to how far the nose is from the eye, because it's going to make your drawing really weird otherwise. So just going back to giving yourself quick sketches of whatever it is that's on the face. Doesn't have to be incredibly accurate. Good opportunity to practice loose lines. And notice that it's also on an angle from eyebrow, the tip of the eyebrow, to the other tip of the eyebrow. It's kind of at an angle. Since his head is tilted, most of the things are going to be a little bit angled as well. It's not a straight on image. And again, you could use a ruler. You could reference that, like, okay, well, you see how it makes a perfect right angle here. And you could see that the bottom of the eye, bring it a little bit closer to you guys. So the bottom of the eye isn't exactly in line with the other side. So you have to make sure that that's the same thing. And then the same thing with the eyebrow. You can see that the tip of the eyebrow isn't the same as that. So this is just another method of making sure that you have accuracy and that you get it down. You notice these little details to help you get the best result you could possibly get. So again, referencing this, the bottom of this eye should not line up with the other one. It should be higher than that. So the other method, the first method we were talking about was the negative space, right? Studying the negative space in order to make sure that you get the best results. The other method is just studying the relationship between objects that are close to each other, or features that are close to each other. So in the first, when we're talking about like the relationship between the eye and the nose, how far away are they? Studying that difference in order to make sure that it's accurate. And the same thing, for instance, let's say when it comes to the nostril, where does it start on the face? You got the crosshair in the middle, it's at this point, but you don't want to make it too wide, right, or too big, because then it's not going to look accurate. It's not going to look like the original image. So you want to make sure that you pay attention to that as well. Where does it actually start? So let's reference back to the image itself. It is right a little bit past the corner of the eye, right, as you could see it. And again, you could see why it's so important to have a transparent ruler, because then you could notice this. You could be like, okay, where exactly does it start in comparison to the eye? And you could see right through the ruler, and you could be like, okay, well, it's not really at the corner of the eye. It's a little bit before it meets the corner of the eye. Right, so again, studying the relationships between the face features or objects or whatever can ensure you get the best results for it. Alright, so we made the nostril there. We're gonna get down to the mouth, right? What's the relationship between the tip of the nose and the mouth? Is it right up here? Like, just notice the gap difference between those two objects. Pay attention to it to as closely as possible. And you could see how the crosshair becomes important once again, because if you are drawing the dip in the lip, in the upper lip, you could see, okay, it's like right by where the crosshair is. And again, that's also at an angle. And the way you could check that is if you look at the original, if you look at the reference, you look at the corner of the mouth, right? It doesn't line up with the other corner of the mouth, so it can't be straight on. And the same thing you have to make sure is the case for your drawing. So if you're doing this, like, oh, look at that, and they match. So it has to be higher. All angle. So we got this that's angled, we got this that's angled, we got the mouth that's angled. And this is the benefit of just giving yourself these light sketches. Now normally I wouldn't do this, I would just eye it, but for the sake of just showing you guys methods and ways that you could improve, these are definitely great tools, great methods. So here's another dilemma. The way I drew this, it's shifted, right? It's shifted way further up than it is in the original. So like you could see in the original, the mouth is kind of touching the frame. So this is again the great use of studying relationships of objects or features. You could see that the bottom of the lip is really close to the frame, whereas for me here, if I was to draw the bottom of the lip, the relationship between the bottom of the lip and the frame is way too wide. So this is where drawing lightly really benefits you, because you could fix that and you could just make these adjustments. Alright, so now how far is the bottom of the lip to right where the chin is, or cheek and the chin, rather. There, it's not too far away, right? So you just kind of use that as your reference. So you kind of build out from there. You know, once you establish yourself, and it's kind of like working with a puzzle. You know, when you're doing a puzzle, you don't start right in the middle. You pick a piece from right in the middle. You want to establish the corners, right? The frame, and then build the puzzle according to these corners to make it easier to eventually create the entire shape. So this is the same, it's kind of the same idea. You know, you establish your corners, you establish your frame, and then from that frame, you kind of build out to make sure everything lines up, to make sure that it all makes sense. And you do this until you eventually don't even have to think about this. Just your eye is able to recognize all this stuff. You don't have to be as technical and methodical about it. Again, it becomes like the alphabet example. You don't have to even think about the alphabet anymore. It just comes to you. Now you could see, you know, since we shifted the entire image, look how weird it looks when the eye is really far from the nose. It's strange, right? It doesn't look right. But it looks really elongated. So erase that. Yeah, it seems like, again, with the eye, this is how useful it is to have this ruler. So again, the bottom of the eye and the top of the left eye are kind of where they cross. Kind of amazing that once you do add the pupil, it breathes life into the image. It really does come alive. And everything before it just kind of looks like this mannequin. Which says how important drawing the eyes is. And how every little detail could really shift the image. As you guys saw, just having to shift the mouth to the bottom to make sure that it matches the original, what the face looked like prior to it. even as small as, let's say, this little V shape of the hairline can change the expression or make them look different. Just an example of how tiny little details really do change the image. I think the best tool is exactly that. Just studying the relationship between everything, between all the objects. It's not just about looking at it and just trying to transfer it. It is a thinking process. It is an observational process. This is why people are saying, "Oh, it's just this gift or whatnot." It's not really so much as that. There are people, like I was mentioning before, there are people who are just naturally predisposed to being able to notice these things, but what they're noticing and what they're able to do is because of this sort of observation, these sort of techniques that are translated a lot faster for them. So you could achieve it still. It's not just about like, oh, okay, well, unless you have this gift, unless you have this ability to be able to translate all that information quickly, then it's not worth it, and you definitely won't be able to achieve the same level as the person. And I don't agree with that. I think just practicing and eventually building yourself up to having this skill set, having this observational ability is possible pretty much by anybody. And one of the best examples of that is, you might have heard about her, is Grandma Moses. She was like 86 years old, if not older. And she started drawing at that painting, actually, oil painting at that age. And you guys can look up her work, and it's pretty good, considering the age, considering that she started out and she draws better than most people do when they're like 15, or 20 or whatnot. And that's because she was just dedicated to the experience, dedicated to practicing and building up the skill set. So I think that's just a perfect example of it's never really too late to develop your skill and whatever it is that you really wanted to do. It's not just drawing. Like if you wanted to play music and you wanted to learn an instrument, it's just the same idea. It's paying attention to all these little details and skills and ways of achieving whatever it is that you're setting yourself out to do, and being consistent and eventually getting there. So really just set yourself a goal and work towards it as often as possible. And don't let people talk you out of the idea because you're not a prodigy, or you're not somebody who's able to do things immediately and with no effort. Then it's not worth it, because again, it's really about the process. It's really about enjoying all this, so more so than it is about the reward or saying like, oh, I'm so great at this or that and the other. It's not so much about getting an ego boost. It really should be about just whatever it is that you're doing. So if you like writing, or if you like playing music, or if you like drawing, it should be about drawing. It should be about music. It should be about writing, more so than it is about the title of like, oh, I have a skill and I'm able to do these things, and so on and so forth. So in this stage of the phase, like as you guys saw at the beginning, it was just like creating the framework, creating your limits. Okay, I drew this part of the eye, gave it just a general shape. That's going to be the limit of whatever it is that I'm going to draw within it. Or I'm going to lengthen it or shorten it or raise it or lower it based on other parts of the face or based on the guidelines that I provided for the face. And then working from there. Didn't start out by just drawing the inside of the eye, for example, and like really getting into the detail of it, putting in all this other stuff, and then being like, oh crap, it's way too high in comparison to where the nose is, the tip of the nose was, or it doesn't really fit within the frame anymore in comparison to like other parts of the face. So yeah, you really do want to do that. And now that you've established it, you were able to, I was able to like create these guidelines. Now I could go in and start putting in all these details. And this is the fun part. Now some people like to use like a regular pencil to do it, like an HB to go over it, but I kind of like to do that after I'm a little bit more, I give the drawing a little bit more definition and just kind of pass it over with the pencil and finalize things even more and define them even more. I kind of enjoy that process, but at some point maybe I'm going to change that and I'm going to do it differently. But for now, this is what I enjoy doing. Now going back to the relationship again, as you can see, like I drew the hairline a little bit too close to the eyebrow, or touching, whereas in the original image, it's not like that. In the original image, there's a little bit of a gap between the hairline and the eyebrow itself. It's like this puzzle format of building out from a certain part. So as you guys can see, I'm using all of these methods, like using the puzzle method, the puzzle guideline method of just like studying objects in comparison to the frame, also using, basic shapes and blocks of shapes to define the entire image within the frame, using guidelines in order to make sure that the angles are right, like from here to here, and using the crosshair in order to give myself parameters to work within, when it comes to like the corners of the mouth, like how far out should it be from, like, let's say the crosshair. Same thing with like, this right here, the relationship between the eyes and the nose, or the nostril rather. All these things, all these different tools in order to make sure that the accuracy of the drawing is right. These are your ABCs. I also like to draw the bubbles, the speech bubbles, just because why not? It's practicing shapes, lines. And you do have to, like if you're doing the comic, obviously you you have to leave space for the speech bubbles, so you have to draw the panel according to, well, in consideration to the speech bubbles. Okay, I have to leave that much, so it helps to actually draw them out and keeping them in mind. You don't want to get carried away with just drawing the panel itself and just completely disregarding the speech bubble. And you're going to run into problems later. This is something that's also important, I also mentioned in other streams, is how tiny little details can really change the expression of the face. So, like, for example, here, right, when you're drawing the corner of the mouth, you can, just because it's a little bit like this little part, the corner of the mouth, because it's lifted a little bit more, because there's like a little bit more flick to it going inwards, it changes the expression from being kind of irritated to a bit of a smirk, right? So you want to pay attention to that in order to make sure that you notice this little detail. This is where this tool right here becomes very useful. It's firm and doesn't really mold itself to a different shape as you're erasing. And this is the first pass. Yeah, as you're doing pencils, like the HB pencil, you can make more adjustments. You could create more accurate lines. But for the first pass, I think this is pretty good. Granted, there are parts, like for example, in the eye, and you can see it, that I pressed way too hard. So before we end the stream, let's correct this. Let's make sure it's not pressed way too much into the paper. The important importance of having a good eraser. And here's another perfect opportunity to study the relationship between objects. So, or using negative space, for example. So you could see that there's like a bit of an eye shape over here, whereas I drew it a little too high up. So here's a chance to correct that. Remember, you don't want to lift the eye up because the eye is supposed to be right below the bottom of the right one. And you could see how changing that gives them more of a disgruntled look. Also helps sometimes to just like move away from whatever it is that you're focusing and focus on something else. So if you're focusing way too much and you're playing around with the eye way too much, take a break, go on to a different part of the face or whatever part of the drawing that you're doing, just so that you don't become too obsessed and start just picking at every little thing, pressing too hard. Just regroup yourself and go to a different part. You know, remind yourself, okay, it's about pressing lightly. Making sure you don't get bogged down by the details too soon. And study the relationship between something else. So I am gonna cut it off here, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I will be back on Monday, same time, starting at 4 for the Drawing Comics stream. If you enjoy this content, subscribe, hit the like button. You'll also get notification if you subscribe. And that way you don't have to wait up. You'll know exactly when Art Lounge is going to be live. You could also join me on the social media. All the links are posted on the site as well. And you guys could post your comments there, questions, if you haven't had a chance to be part of the live stream, and I'll write you back, or we'll talk about it in the next stream. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you soon.